All right, boys and girls, it is a little earlier in the morning than I prefer, but we're recording one, and I've been waiting to do this one for a while because I just needed I guess really I need time to record, period. I've been so damn busy. But this one is, I'm reacting to the Fat Electrician. Usually I don't react to other people's content, so this will be the first time I'm doing that. Do go check out the Fat Electrician on YouTube if you haven't already. The stories are amazing. The narration style and writing is incredible. Good scripting on his part. Always finds a very creative way to make me laugh, and quite enjoy the content. So this one is about the Grumman LLV mail truck. I was a mailman for about 2.5 years in Arkansas, and I can tell you that I fucking hated these things, but I loved them at the same time. They have next to a 0 turn radius. They go fast and can be loud sometimes. However, they were very not good on the highway, that's for sure. That was just always a terrifying experience. They called them LLVs, which stood for Long Life Vehicle, which was not really the actual case. More like they perpetuated its suffering as long as they possibly could. These things broke down. I think the average vehicle breaks down every like 8 months to a year, which is not fantastic. We had several mail carriers that had their trucks break down way more than that. But they did perpetuate the suffering by sending out this mechanic who works for the post office with a truck full of parts and shit to come out and see what is wrong with the vehicle and attempt to repair it right there on the street. And if they couldn't do that, they would bring you a new piece of shit and take the old one away to go be taken back to the shop to be fixed. These are some hilarious vehicles, and I can't wait to really get down watching this video because I had to deal with these things for such a long time, and you guys will be getting my mail expertise, which is not really expertise in my opinion. All right. Here we go.
Every single time I try to make a funny, lighthearted video, it gets completely unhinged. Today we're talking about Northrop Grumman's most iconic vehicle of all time. Every aviation nerd just sat forward in their chair because if I don't pick their favorite Northrop Grumman plane, they're gonna roast me in the comments section.
Yes.
Because if you don't know, Northrop Grumman is a defense contractor primarily known for making warplanes, and they've created some of the most iconic and effective warplanes the world has ever seen. Some of those planes include the F-4F Wildcat, the F-6F Hellcat, America's gun with wings, the A-10 Warthog, the B-21 stealth bomber, and its replacement, the B-21 Raider. But all of these pale in comparison to Northrop Grumman's most iconic and durable vehicle of all time. A vehicle that was designed to perform its tasks swiftly, despite snow or rain or heat or gloom of night, the LLV, the Long Life Vehicle, aka the mail truck.
You're not serious.
I'm dead serious, brother.
You've got to be shitting me. I shot down 3 MiGs on one of those.
What
Yeah,
is this
the same
edit,
people
bro?
who made like half the planes in U.S. military history also made your friendly neighborhood mail truck. I
Yep.
can only imagine that the U.S. Postal Service put out a memo like, hey, we're looking for a vehicle to help deliver packages, and the U.S. government was like, oh, package, payload, potato, potato, same thing. Call up Northrop Grumman. They're really good at delivering that type of stuff. Okay, Northrop Grumman's used to putting warheads on foreheads, now they're putting parcels on porches. It's the same thing. Now I need for Lockheed Martin to start making action figures, and my life will be complete.
You put munitions, chips, and toys?
Standard issue is insufficient.
Okay, all jokes aside,
Amen,
I'm actually
brother.
legitimately upset that this thing is named the LLV. I mean, it's made by Northrop Grumman, the makers of the F-4F Wildcat and the F-6F Hellcat, and you didn't name this the Mail Cat? Are you
Right.
fucking kidding me?
Did you forget to do the ad?
No, I did the ad. Thanks for finally being in a YouTube video with a shirt on for once.
You're welcome.
Nice song, Borat. This video is brought to you by Zydax Custom Game.
What? Nice thong, Borat. Fuck. Oh my god. He goes, yes, and he finally came into my YouTube videos with a fucking shirt on. Oh, Jesus Christmas.
Gaming PCs, they're all made right here in America with American tech support. They can do any type of customization you want, or they have pre-built ones ready to ship right now. And then we have one of our newest sponsors, Zaka Life Recovery Balm. It's made right here in America, and it's the best thing I've found for aches, pains, and athletic injuries. It blows every other topical treatment I've ever tried out of the water. I'm gonna have both those sponsors and discount codes linked down below. Let's get back to the video. So after finding out that the mail truck that I've grown up with my entire life was actually made by Northrop Grumman, I decided, hey, I'm gonna make a video on this. This is gonna be hilarious. It's gonna be lighthearted. It's gonna be funny. It's gonna be great. So I started looking up the specs. I started looking up the history, how this came to be. And then I asked myself one simple question. Wait a minute. Why on earth is a defense contractor making this little tiny car when an automotive contractor probably could have done the same thing better and probably cheaper? And per usual, to absolutely nobody's surprise, it's because once again, the government ruins everything.
Yes, we do.
All right, so let's take it from the top. Once upon a time in 1775, the United States Continental Congress says, hey, delivering mail is super duper important because we don't have email and phones and telegraphs yet, and delivering letters is the only way.
And I'm going to get to it before he does. The post office is the only constitutionally assured government entity where that's like guaranteed jobs. Like,
that we can communicate. So we need to establish a post office, and we're going to take one of our smartest founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, and make him the first postmaster general to figure this entire thing out.
Nobody knows that except people who work for the post office because they go over that in orientation. That's like their favorite fact. So yeah, this tracks. This is real.
Then the government pretty much immediately decides, hey, we want this to kind of be a government agency, but also we don't want to have to give it any tax money to be able to run itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it a legal monopoly. We're going to go ahead and say that the U.S. Postal Service is the only entity that is legally allowed to deliver the mail.
So not only was that like a brilliant / shitty move on their part, but it was actually, it came out to be a very shitty decision. And I think it was within the last couple decades that the post office was paying people super good money. Like, we're talking people were making like $24 an hour near starting pay at like almost 20 years ago or some shit. Like, it was a wild, they were making way more money than they are now, the carriers and everyone who works for the post office. Because over the course of their existence, they have been able to save a shitload of money from their profit margins and use that for things that they need funding for. And they were going to replace the LLVs, which were like 10 years past due of replacement at that time. And people were dying in the summer. Still happens every year, unfortunately. As they were going to replace these vehicles, Congress wanted some money. And they just took it all from the post office. They had like anywhere between like $3 and $6 billion, I believe, or something crazy. They had quite an amount of money, and then Congress just took it all. No reason given, they just took all the money that the post office had, and they, I guess, either stuffed their pockets or used it for whatever the fuck they wanted to. But the post office had to change its entire operation because it literally had no extra money. So all of what they were paying people had to come down drastically. People were making like $5 less an hour because of Congress and politicians. It was absolutely insane. And now they make like 1 cent on every dollar they make in profit, which is shit for an organization.
That way, the U.S. Postal Service is going to be guaranteed to get 100% of the business, so they're going to have enough money to be able to fund themselves and not have to rely on taxpayer money. And this is still going on to this day. This is a legally recognized and regulated monopoly. Buh! What about FedEx and UPS? Buh! That's actually a good question out of you for once. So the monopoly only applies to like letters and mail and shit like that. Packages are technically different, and there's allowed to be commercial competition there. That's why UPS and FedEx primarily only deliver packages. Now, I say usually because there is an exception that if you have something of vital importance that needs to be like overnighted to somewhere immediately, you are allowed to use FedEx or USPS to ship that if it's of vital importance. And I know what you're thinking. It seems like there's a pretty big gray area there. I mean, who sets the criteria as to whether or not something is important enough to violate the U.S. Postal Service's legal monopoly and be able to use FedEx or UPS to send a letter or an important document? Well, obviously, that would be the U.S. Postal Service's in-house federal law enforcement agency, the Postal Inspectors.
Yes, this is fucking real. And they are actually crazy.
I'm not shitting you. The Mailmen have their own federal law enforcement agency. I had no idea.
These people make crazy arrests on all sorts of mail fraud, mail theft, a whole bunch of other things. These guys, they're literally the mail police. Yeah, no, this is real. This is, Yep.
Now, typically, the postal inspectors are doing really great things, like making sure that people aren't sending bombs or drugs through the mail, or investigating people that have had their mail stolen, which, if you didn't know, is actually a federal crime. And back in the day in 1775, when the post office and the postal inspectors were founded, Congress levied the death penalty for stealing mail. And while that's all fine and dandy, once in a while, the postal inspectors get a wild hair in their ass, and they decide that they are going to enforce their legalized monopoly. For example, back in 1993, a big company called Equifax was using a private courier to deliver all of their mail, not just their packages. And because of this, the U.S. Postal Inspectors launched an armed raid of their company headquarters, determined that their mail wasn't important enough to be overnighted, and that they were legally required to use the United States Postal Service, and then gave them a $30,000 fine. Yeah, if you live in America and you run a business and you decide that you don't like using the United States Postal Service and you're going to exclusively try to use like FedEx or UPS or something, there is a greater than 0% chance that armed mailmen in body armor will show up to your headquarters and raid your business, tell you that's illegal, and then give you a fine. Okay, do I want to talk shit right now because that seems absolutely insane and ridiculous? Yeah, a little bit. Am I gonna? Absolutely not, because they know where I live, okay? I didn't know they existed until yesterday, and already Special Forces mailman is on the top of my list of people I'm not gonna fuck with. So everybody kind of already knows that being a mail carrier is a government job, but most people don't.
So not only do they have that, but that's also a wonderful job opportunity for people, for veterans. And a lot of veterans, you'll find a shitload of veterans work at the post office because their government benefits carry over, and the retirement income that they'll make afterwards is crazy. So not only are they going to get like 2 checks from the military a month for the rest of their life, but they're going to be getting a check from the mail, from the post office for the rest of their life when they retire. So they're going to be receiving 3 checks at minimum, plus whatever disability they have. You know, like it's a system that, if made more efficient, would be a lot fucking better, but allows our veterans to make more money. And yeah, so it's quite interesting.
Understand to the extent that the U.S. Postal Service is its own government entity, so much so that it necessitates its own federal law enforcement agency. So going back to the Grumman mail cat and the actual physical transportation of the mail, it always just kind of went with the times. Back in the 1700s when they were founded, it was delivered on horseback. When cars came out and they became more and more common, the post office began using more and more cars. So the U.S. Postal Service would just acquire whatever cars they needed whenever they needed them, and this went on for decades. But by the 1930s and 1940s, it was becoming a huge issue because the USPS had acquired a ton of different cars. They were all different makes, all different models. They all drove different. They all had different carrying capabilities. They all required different mechanics, different parts. It was a huge logistical nightmare for this enormous fleet of vehicles. As I'm sure you can imagine, it would be like 100 times easier if all of the vehicles in the US postal fleet were the same exact thing and all had the same capability, requiring the same replacement parts, the same type of mechanics, and you could team teach all the postal carriers how to drive one vehicle and one vehicle only. So at the end of World War II, with hundreds of thousands of Americans returning home and looking for jobs, the United States Postal Service recognized a very unique opportunity with the Willys Motor Company Jeep. Because the Jeep was being used by the U.S. military, there was already a ton being manufactured, and a lot of the people returning home from the military already knew how to drive it. There was a ton of people qualified to work on them mechanically, and there was a ton of excess parts around. And with the military downsizing, there was a huge surplus of them, so it was a perfect fit in pretty much every way. It is a rare case of the government doing something 100% right, and the United States Postal Service adopted the Jeep as their primary vehicle. And that worked for like 40 years, but as the US got bigger and bigger with more and more people, and people started sending more and more mail and more packages, the capacity that the Jeep could hold simply wasn't enough, and the United States Postal Service wanted something that was capable of carrying more mail. But you have to remember, this is a government agency, and they can't do anything simple when it comes to getting new equipment, so they can't just go over to like Ford or Chevy and be like, hey, build me a new mail truck. No, they have to figure out the exact specifications that they're looking for, and then they have to send it out to all the government contractors so that they can all put a bid in on it. That way the government contractors can come in, do the exact bare minimum, and make a ton of money. I mean, let's just look at the LLV, for example. They wanted this thing to weigh a maximum of 3,000 pounds. Guess how much it weighs? Exactly 3,000 pounds. They wanted it to be able to carry a minimum of 1,000 pounds. Guess how much it can carry? Exactly 1,000 pounds on the dot. They wanted it to be this tall, this wide, this long, and Grumman came along and said, dope, I'm gonna make a metal fucking rectangle exactly that size, throw an engine and some wheels on it, and call it a good day. They literally made a mobile filing cabinet, which...
Literally, this thing is such a piece of shit. I hated it, but I loved it. Like I said before, it was entirely metal, with the floors having just the thinnest little plastic covering for your feet, because the transmission was right below the floorboard, which is metal, and was so hot and right above the road, and all that heat just came right in the truck. Oh, what about air conditioning? There was none. There is none. They don't allow that shit. Now, the new vehicles that they're coming out with, they have it, but they didn't have it when I was in there. I almost died.
To be fair, in hindsight, after serving in the military, I should have been able to recognize that the mail truck that I grew up with was absolutely a military-grade piece of equipment built by the cheapest bidder. I mean, this is what I drove in the military, the Humvee ambulance, and I mean, the similarities are there. I mean, they both look like the blueprints for them were drawn by a third grader that didn't know how to draw a car yet, and then the 3D renderings were made out of fucking Legos. Now, to be fair, though, while I have driven the Humvee ambulance and it's a miserable experience, I've never driven a mail truck, so I don't actually know what that's like. So I turned to the internet, because surely
it can be a
Mailman
miserable
has
experience,
something somewhere,
but it can be
on the planet
fantastic.
that is going to tell me what that experience is like, and here's what I found. Quote, regular driving around town was pretty bearable, but driving the LLV on the highway shouldn't even be legal. I've had to do it a few times, and those times were probably the most terrified I've been.
Horrifying, bro.
Riding a motorcycle over 100 miles an hour? No problem. Merging onto the highway in a mail truck? You couldn't pay me to do it again.
This is so
facts.
facts.
Deafening noise and harsh vibration were all bad enough, but knowing the body of the vehicle would crush like a soda can in an accident is what made it such a frightening experience.
Okay, I'm gonna pause here.
Right, because that
So, we had an incident with a new mail carrier in a rural setting. Now, we had to do Amazon Sundays, which is deliver Amazon packages on Sundays, because Amazon was paying the post office a shitload of money to do so because they didn't have the capacity. So, we had this rural carrier who had both earphones in. And delivering mail, whether or not you can have an earphone in, is up to your postmaster or your supervisor. But 9 out of 9 times they didn't really care enough to enforce anything about it. So we just kind of would go around with earphones in or something like that, like a single earphone in. And this was before like AirPods and shit came out. This was when Bluetooth, like singular separate Bluetooth earpieces, were very expensive. At a minimum of like $175 starting out, because there's only like 2 companies that made them, and then everybody else came after. But this carrier had both earphones and was driving across railroad tracks. didn't see that the railroad lights were flashing, and apparently the things didn't come down, and they either that or this railroad crossing didn't have those things, which is questionable if that was the case. Runs the railroad lights and the tracks and gets hit by a freight train. Apparently this LLV got opened up like a tin can entirely and was in mangled and shattered pieces, like shredded metal. The mail carrier was in extremely critical condition, and it was a rural carrier who was not paying attention, was not listening to their surroundings, had both earphones in. Just a dumb, not paying attention moment almost caused them their life. I think the last time I heard about them was 3 days after this incident had happened, and they were still in critical condition, basically fighting for their life. These things honestly shouldn't be legal, period.
That is to a T what it's like to drive a military ambulance. I got one of those things going 75 one time thanks to an enormous hill, and it felt like I was re-entering the Earth's atmosphere as everything that wasn't strapped down rattled out of place and started falling to the floorboard. Now, I don't know this for certain, but driving a Humvee or an LLV really fast kind of seems like anal beads, you know? The faster you go, the bumpier it gets, and if you go too fast, there's gonna be shit everywhere.
What did you just say? Brian, this does not seem appropriate to watch in front of the baby.
Now, to be fair to the Grumman mail cat, is it a turd? Absolutely, but it is really tough. Because here's some of the testing criteria the LLV had to be able to meet before it would be adopted as the USPS postal vehicle. We have drive 5,760 miles at 55 miles an hour with 0 malfunctions and 0 broken parts. Drive 11,520 miles at 45 miles an hour on gravel with 0 malfunctions and 0 broken parts. Drive 2,880 miles, stopping every 250 feet, accelerating to at least 15 miles an hour in between stops with 0 malfunctions and 0 broken parts. Drive 960 miles on cobblestone, 0 broken parts. Drive 960 miles over potholes, ensuring that every single wheel hits the pothole at least 35,000 times with 0 broken parts. To accomplish that, they took a Chevy S10 chassis, shortened the wheelbase so it could have a tighter turn radius, and then made the entire body of the vehicle out of aluminum so it couldn't rust. So at a minimum, at least it's tough. Despite the fact that it is really tough, it is finally time to start replacing the United States Postal Service carrier vehicle because, well, the engine that they put in these things is an engine from the 1970s known as the Iron Duke, and this bad boy is getting like 9 miles to the gallon.
Oh my God, you had to refill your truck like every other day, bro. And then, so if we did Amazon Sundays, and the regular carrier would come back, and if their truck wasn't topped off, they'd get pissed. Who drove my truck on Sunday? Some carrier from Jacksonville. Well, those little CCAs and RCAs need to learn to top off the trucks, but just like, bro, you have to do it like every other day anyways. My guy, chill.
This is the same engine they were putting in the Cavalier and the Trailer Park Ferrari back in the day. I mean, the Pontiac Fiero. Don't laugh, the Pontiac Fiero was high-class white trash, okay? The only thing cooler than that when I was growing up was the 2002 Dale Earnhardt Edition Monte Carlo. Sorry, I'm getting distracted.
Man.
The main problem with the LLV is the gas mileage, okay? Because it only gets 9 miles to the gallon, you have to realize this is like the biggest fleet of vehicles that the United States has. There's over 140,000 of these things, meaning that for every single penny that gas prices go up, the U.S. Postal Service has to spend an additional $8 million on fuel alone. And this is the part where you're like, oh, America's capitalist, that's fine, that's the cost of doing business, just raise the prices of your services, and it's covered, it's no big deal. You would think that, but remember, the U.S. Postal Service is a government-regulated monopoly, meaning that anytime they want to change their pricing, the government has to sign off on it, and the government takes forever to do anything. Another example of this would be like the power company, right? Because you can't shop around for different power providers customers the same way you look for like an internet service provider or a cell phone provider. You only have one power company available where you live, the same way you only have one post office available where you live. Anytime the power company wants to raise their rates, the government has to sign off on it, and it's a huge deal. Same thing applies to the postal service and stamps or anything else. Because of this, they can't effectively adapt and change their prices, so it's a humongous issue. So how do we solve this? Well, there's two options. You could A, get rid of the monopoly that's set in place because it's no longer effective for what it was originally supposed to do by helping the USPS, and now it's actually hindering them more than it's helping because they're no longer able to change their prices to actually be competitive. Or you could B, make them get different vehicles. And obviously, we're absolutely 100% of the time going to go with B because the US government, or any government ever really, is never ever going to give up control, and they have control over the USPS, and they're never ever going to let that go. They would rather see that thing burn to the ground than give up control over it. So, obviously, the USPS is getting new vehicles. But then that bites the US Postal Service in the ass because remember, they're a government agency, and they can't just like go to Toyota and be like, hey, Toyota, that new truck that you guys just came out with that's $10,000 and really cool. Can we buy a bunch of those for fleet vehicles? No, they can't do that. They have to figure out the specs they want. Then they have to send that out and let all these defense contractors bid on them. And then after they bid, they have to give the defense contractors millions of dollars so that they can develop the new vehicle. So they're going to pay for all the R&D up front. And then when Oshkosh Defense wins the bid with this fucking thing that looks like it was animated by Pixar, the other company that they beat is going to turn around and file a lawsuit and sue because they're saying that it wasn't a fair enough competition, despite the fact that the U.S. taxpayers literally gave them all the money for R&D in the first place. And then that's going to delay the whole project
$6 billion contract.
And then bottom line, it's going to take 20 fucking years to fix the issue. The entire time the U.S. Postal Service is struggling and trying to figure shit out while the government refuses to let them actually do their job and be fucking competitive. And it just sucks because the U.S. Postal Service is sacred. There's nothing more sacred to society than the mailman. All I wanted to do was have a happy, lighthearted video because I thought it was funny that Northrop Grumman was making mail trucks, and now after researching it, I'm gonna get upset every time I watch my mail lady deliver the mail because I'm gonna recognize that she's wearing a parka and overalls inside of her vehicle because the heater barely works because she's driving a 40-year-old mail truck that's a piece of shit because the government fucks up everything they even get near touching. So in conclusion, I guess that's the story of why mail trucks are made by defense contractors. And if you're a mail carrier, I've always appreciated you, but I'm gonna be honest, I have another level of appreciation for what you do because I truly genuinely have no idea the levels of bureaucratic bullshit that you had to hurdle on your way to get mail into my mailbox.
That shit is hard.
Thank you. Seriously, thank you. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over the
Makes me feel good about my service.
Black Bang out.
Go like and subscribe his fucking channel. What are you doing here? So the story I mentioned earlier that I have. So I was delivering in this little town in Arkansas called Rose City. And it is not a rose garden, that's for damn sure. So when I was delivering mail there one day, I was doing a park and loop. Park and loop is when you take the LLV, you park it, and you grab the mail that you need for a very specific loop of the neighborhood and deliver that mail and whatever packages come with. You have your satchel on you, your scanner, your packages or whatever spurs or SPRs that are in your bag. They're small packages basically. Have those in your satchel. DPS mail, which are just letters in your hand, and then flats and magazines on your arm. And you would literally walk through a neighborhood with a satchel on this shoulder, mail in this shoulder, and you're just kind of having not a great time being a pack mule. So I was doing a parking loop, delivering mail at this one house. And this one house is just a normal, unsuspecting house. And I'm like, okay, cool. Boop, throw some mail in this mailbox on this porch because they didn't start enforcing mailboxes on curbside until the 1980s when it became a law. Other than that, if your mailbox was on your house, it got grandfathered in and you didn't have to change it. So I go from this house, this unsuspecting house, to this next house. And the next thing I know, I turn around and I hear a dog barking. And I see this black vehicle slowly roll up to the house that I had just delivered mail to. Then I observe the windows rolling down in the front and the back seats. And then I observe about 2 pairs of hands coming through each set of windows with pistols and opening fucking fire on this house, turning it into Swiss cheese. I proceed to ski-daddle off of the fucking porch I was on, the house next door, around the side of the house behind the fucking AC unit, and just sat there like, okay, now I need to pee, and I'm afraid for my life. But as they continued unloading on this house, they then drove down the street and slowed down. I'm scared shitless. I'm like, oh God, they saw me. They're coming to shoot me. Oh my God, this is it. So I get like my pepper spray ready, which is actually dog spray. It's used for dogs at least. And I'm like, okay, what? Okay. And then I'm not hearing any doors, and it's like 2 seconds had gone by, and I hear, "You all right, Mr. Mailman?" What happened that day leaves me flabbergasted to this day. I was spared simply because I was a mailman. I just know that thanks to being a mailman and being at the right place at the right time, I didn't have to die. At the same time, it's not like I was a target anyways. So I don't know, but that was my story, and probably the closest I've come to death. At least what I thought was as close to death as I was gonna get. But yeah, so that was a fucking hilarious video. Like and subscribe his video if you like my reactions. Like and subscribe. If you don't like it, hit that dislike button and hit it twice to make sure it works. I appreciate your time. Go out there and have childlike exuberance and fun. Life is meant to be not cooped up in an office. Life is meant to be adventuring, spent adventuring and sating your curiosity. So